Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Subtext Podcast Archives. These are the long-lost episodes of the Subtext that were originally produced between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, the Subtext moved to American Theater Magazine, and we've been producing the pod there monthly ever since. These time capsules are being shared here in their entirety, including plenty of outdated references and advertisements for events far in the past. If you enjoy them, please subscribe to the current podcast feed for the Subtext or stream new episodes on the website for American Theater Magazine. Thank you for listening.
I remember when I first started to write plays, I had all sorts of great ideas. A play about a man being executed on death row, a play about inmates performing Hamlet. Something that wasn't quite an idea but involved stacks of newspapers supposedly meant to symbolize the Twin Towers on 9/11. One about a mathematician con artist, fledgling serial killers, an Andy Kaufman death hoax meta-theatrical musical. I had a million ideas. Most of them were either terrible or simply not me. And that was the thing I got hung up on a lot. Not me. What was me? Who am I? That old question we all circle at one point or another. Who am I? Some circle it for a moment and continue on their journey, and others can't stop circling, creating a cycle of asking and answering and asking again. It took me a very long time to come to that question, and I've been circling it ever since. And it's because it feels necessary for me. I can't seem to ratchet up the motivation to write if I can't find an important question about myself being addressed in the play. But who am I? I haven't found anything even close to an answer to that. I'm from New Hampshire, whatever that means. I'm white. I'm male, so obviously the American theater needs to have my voice represented. I'm Irish, I'm French, I'm Polish. I'm all those things, but I'm not really any of those things because I can't think of a single aspect of my life or upbringing that connect directly to my cultural background. I once visited Ireland. It was beautiful. I loved it there and would love to return. I visited France twice. That's beautiful and magical and all the things. I never felt particularly connected to either country. Then I visited Poland. And what happened to me there was profound. I have no idea why, and it's difficult to put my finger on what I experienced. The simplest way to describe it was that it felt familiar. I never in my life considered myself Polish. I mean, my last name literally means Polish person and is often used as a pejorative, but I'm not Polish. I'm a mix, a mutt, an American, just some random white dude writing plays. But my first time walking around Warsaw made me realize there was something inherently Polish about my personality. You can see it on my face. I call it my resting Polish face. I'm not unhappy. I'm just prepared to be. Who am I? I still don't know precisely. There'd be no reason to write if I did know precisely. I'm circling my Polishness. I'm circling my New Hampshire-ishness. I'm writing about these things as I try to come closer to something that feels like an answer. And I'm thinking about this right now because I leave soon to spend 2 weeks in Poland to work on a couple theater projects. While there, I'll be meeting with a distant cousin who I hope speaks English. I'll be walking the streets and seeing familiar faces all over. I'll be writing, and I'll be circling that same old question over and over. And hopefully, I'll be returning with something. Hello, friends. Welcome to the 19th episode of The Subtext, lucky number 19. I'm Brian James Polak, playwright, vegetarian, and future octogenarian. If you have any interest in episodes 1 through 18, find us on iTunes and listen to the archives. While you're there, sign up to receive future episodes and leave us some comments, the kind of comments that will bring a smile to my resting Polish face. While you listen, feel free to send us a tweet at Subtext Podcast. This month's guest is Alena Smith, whose play Icebergs is currently running at the Geffen Playhouse. Currently, that is, if you happen to be listening before December 18th, 2016. According to her bio, she's a playwright, author, and TV writer for shows like The Newsroom and The Affair. She also majored in philosophy as an undergrad. I should ask her something metaphysical. Friends I have, how do I ever meet another person? And so I took an acting class. And then I moved to Boston and took improv, and I became an improv actor at this theater in Boston for a couple years, and was not good at it. was going to be ceremoniously fired because I wasn't very good. But I lasted 2 years doing it because I'm great in the background. Like every improv troupe needs that person that can be over there.
Right.
And I mastered the over there thing, but they were gonna boot me, so I quit because, of course. And then I started to do theater and do real plays or traditional plays
As an actor,
and then kind of sucked at that too. But
I'm sure this is not true.
but I never felt like I should be on stage.
Right.
So I started to write, where I was just like, but I still had this like, I gotta do a thing. Like I need a thing, and I started to write. And because I was in the theater, writing plays was the natural sort of. And then when that happened, I was like, oh, click. And then I was like, I want to move to LA to be a writer. And then I moved to LA, and actually moving to LA is when I fell in love with theater, which is like I didn't love theater in Boston. I didn't do a lot of theater. I did plays, but I didn't go see a lot of theater.
Right.
I didn't experience a lot. But I came here, got a job at a theater, started to see a shitload of theater, and was like, oh, okay, this is what I want to do. Yeah.
Cool.
So now that I've been interviewed,
Yes,
and
thoroughly.
I've shared my, and people who listen to this have already heard basically my entire life story in bits and pieces. And last month's interview, Daryl Watson started off by interviewing me, and I said, this is you trying to burn time, right? So you don't have to talk about yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you can nutshell your entree into theater.
Sure. Well, depends how far back you want to go. But I guess since we have an hour, I'll
go all the way back. Were you a baby theater actor?
No. My entryway into theater is sort of like consistently a little bit bizarre. I never was a theater person. I always was a writer. Literally from the time I was 11, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I wrote things. But when I was in high school, I went to a very strange high school in Poughkeepsie, New York, called Poughkeepsie Day School, where we didn't have desks and didn't get grades and called our teachers by their first names. And nobody ever had to try out for anything because this was like part of the socialist credo of this school. So you didn't have to try out for sports. You didn't have to try out for theater. And what we did every year is we wrote a musical, an original musical, for anybody who wanted to be in it. So we wrote musicals for 50 kids often. And also the rule was that everybody had to have a part. No one could just be in the background or be a chorus person because everyone's parents would come see it and they wanted to see their kid have lines and have a part. So
oh man, I need to be in the background, so this would totally kill me.
You could request that, of course, but nobody ever did. So these musicals were like monstrosities. They were like 4.5 hours long and had 50 kids. But no tech, like no.
The poor parents.
There was just a raise. We had a room at the school called the Big Room, and it just had a platform at one end of it, and that was where we did these plays. But it was almost a year-long process of writing the musical, which involved teachers and students together. So like our music teacher would work with kids who had music skills and write the music for the songs. I and my best friend, whose father was the English teacher, we were kind of like the core of the creators of these musicals.
Right.
And so one of the musicals relevantly to today's world was about the first ever female candidate for president, and it took place on a train, and there was a murder on the train while she was in the middle of her campaign for president, and it was called All Aboard. And the entire play, all 50 characters were on stage on the train for the entire play. And I think I was in 8th grade, but I played a 7th grader or something. Anyway.
So you had range.
So my first, yeah, exactly. So my My first experience with making theater was very, in a way, kind of avant-garde, or it was connected to the ideas, I think, of like poor theater. Like I always believed that you could make something out of nothing. You didn't need costumes. You didn't need sets. You didn't, you just needed like words and bodies. So then I went to college and I was a philosophy major and continued writing like poetry and fiction. And then my senior year, I decided to write a play. And my school that I went to didn't have a theater department. So I wrote this play. I got my friends to be in it, and I put it on, again, like in a basement, which had like a coffee shop in this basement where we would hang out. And it was on this very tiny stage in a corner of this basement room. And I did the sound and the lights for it. And, there was probably 40 people in the audience, and I like handmade posters and put them around. So again, it was very much like connected to how I had done it before.
But what motivated that? Like suddenly your senior year?
Right. Okay. So, I would also say, so I went to college at Haverford College, which is outside of Philadelphia. And at the time, this is like in the early 2000s, late 90s, 2000. I graduated in 2002. But the kind of main event of Philadelphia theater at the time revolved around two companies, which were Pig Iron Theater Company and Headlong Dance Theater.
Right.
So it was also my entry again into theater. I wasn't like seeing plays in New York. I wasn't seeing Broadway musicals. I was seeing very ensemble generated physical theater works that were super intellectual, but also very funny and very vibrant and but created in a sense like by a group just out of the passion of wanting to put something on stage. And I was around that enough because I sort of weirdly became friends in college with everyone who had an instinct towards the performing arts. So my best friend was a dancer and choreographer, but we were both philosophy majors. Anyway, it's kind of a messy story, but I wanted to do it. I just wanted to do it. I wanted to put on a play. I mean, I had been in plays in my life. I had always had a kind of theatricalness to my personality, I think. And but the play itself that I wrote was very much about the philosophy, or it was inspired by the philosophy that I had been studying. So I had been studying Wittgenstein, and he wrote about the philosophy of language. And I wrote this sort of weird Alice in Wonderland kind of play about a girl who goes into a TV in her mind and gets lost in all kinds of wordplay and nonsense. I was very interested in language and nonsense at the time. But it was also just about my experience as an adolescent and growing up with a strict father in my house who didn't want me to watch TV. And
so it sounds like you were a college student who wasn't so insular into the college life, but you were still very much connected to the outside world and experiencing the arts in the city around you. So
to some extent. And they also came to our school and presented things there and did workshops with us and things like that. And but I think the main point that I'm trying to get across is that I always had this kind of interdisciplinary approach to theater, and I was not a person who, until I left college and then I applied to Yale Drama School with the one play that I had written, and then I got into Yale weirdly, by a fluke, I feel like, in this one year. And it was like going in the complete deep end of the professional American theater, or as they refer to it at Yale, the legitimate stage, and learning all of a sudden, oh my God, there's this like pretty conservative tradition of the American theater where things get done a certain way, where there's a canon, where the canon is very respected, where, people do their own jobs and they don't do someone else's job. So if you're the stage manager, you don't write the play. And if you're the playwright, you don't direct the play. And, that anything that broke that mold was considered downtown and a little crazy. And I had only ever experienced that type of sort of ad hoc, improvisational, throw it together, like take whatever leftovers are in the refrigerator and make a meal out of it kind of thing. And now it was like, no, there's a there's a strict way that you become a playwright, and there are certain markers that you must achieve in order to become a playwright. The first one being graduate school, then being, getting a play put on in New York that gets reviewed in the New York Times, at these specific types of theaters. So it was all of a sudden like very rigid.
So how did you reconcile your own motivations with this sort of like strict way things are done?
I mean, it was incredibly confusing, I think, in a lot of ways, and frustrating. But also there is, I can't say enough for being given the opportunity to actually learn the canon and the tradition that you are carrying out. So for me, like, when I got into Yale, I literally could name two playwrights. I could name Shakespeare and Tom Stoppard. And I thought that Tennessee Williams was a woman. Like, I didn't know anything about theater. Okay. And when I left Yale, I had read all of Chekhov, all of Ibsen. I had seen 8,000 gazillion Shakespeare productions because that's what the actors at Yale do,
right,
largely. I knew what the difference was between, like, European salon theater of the 19th century and, like, August Wilson in America in the 20th century. And I was very, and out of that, like, for me, it was like, I acquired a massive kind of toolkit. I learned all the different ways there are. I learned different dramaturgies, basically, and I loved learning all of those. But then, and at Yale, there still was a kind of experimentalism in the sense that we were students with academic or institutionalized funding to put on like 50 or 60 productions a year. So there was so many plays happening. And certainly not all of them were completely traditional. There was some, stuff that was like, I'm forgetting the name of a play called Request Concert by this Viennese or Austrian playwright Franz Xavier Kreutz, which is a 45-minute silent play where a woman comes home from work, takes her clothes off, has dinner, goes to the bathroom, does the dishes, gets in bed, then gets out of bed, takes out a bunch of pills and swallows them all and kills herself. And, so I saw a lot of different things. And I was obsessed with the form. I was really obsessed with the form of theater, like the fact, what is possible to do in a box, basically. Like I still was interested in that, this idea of something from nothing, I think.
So you can go to this 45-minute silent Viennese play and still be awed and find inspiration. Mm-hmm. And you could go see Three Sisters in the same.
Oh, yeah. Not that Three Sisters is normal at all, because Three Sisters is totally crazy and one of my favorite plays for sure.
Why is that?
Well, I just think that Chekhov, it's interesting that Chekhov has become synonymous in a certain way in our contemporary moment. Chekhov is synonymous with realism, when actually Chekhov is totally surrealism. It's totally crazy. You have characters who just, every time they come on stage, they say the same thing over and over again, like a weird sort of wind-up doll, And I saw a production of Three Sisters at ART, the American Repertory Theater, while I was in grad school. That was directed by a Polish director. I forget his name right now. But it was just incredible. And one of the things about it, around the entire stage, delineating where the fourth wall would be, was this like neon square, and then at a certain point, I think someone broke through that square, but there was a lot of more crazy things going on in that production. People had, their faces painted white. I think the thing with Chekhov is that you can minimize it and bring it down to a level where it's just sort of it's like mumblecore
right,
theater,
right.
Or you can expand it so hugely that it's the greatest, craziest clowns you've ever seen. And I think that also relates to a bigger question, which is, what the hell is realism anyway? We live in totally different realities, and there's, to say that there's one thing called realism or one thing called reality is really reductive.
Well, perhaps realism is the thing that you can take and boil down to something that is in essence and present in the most simple form, or it is a thing.
Right, but why is minimalism more real than maximalism? I don't think it is. Our life contains extremes. as much as it contains, mundanities. So,
Yeah, perhaps the truth is there is no truth and there are no rules.
Yeah.
So, like you were saying before, you learn everything. Mm-hmm. You learn.
I think there's
what
more
the quote unquote rules are, and then you just go and do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's norms, and I think that people get used to seeing things in a specific way, and stories that work in a certain way, or characters that work in a certain way, and also there's trends, and things come into being more trendy and then less trendy over time. But I think that there's so much magic and elasticity to theater and to plays, and every production of a play is different, and so there's no on film you get it, you get the take, you make the edit, and it's frozen forever, and then it is how it is. But with a play, you can always come and find some new kind of truth in it.
Yeah, and I think it's so great when you go to see a play and the playwright and director and team and, creative team, production team understand the rules, the norms, the expectations, and are able to use those and not just present to you something that is traditional and normal, but know what the audience is expecting and play off of their expectations. Yes. There's something to me that's so satisfying.
Yes.
When you feel like there's an intention to that, and in the end, when you're walking to your car or you're driving home or maybe the next day you're thinking about it, these things you realize all of these moments. I think that's what I kind of felt with A View from the Bridge, and what the playwright wasn't involved in that. Ivo van Hove, is that how you say his name? That's what it felt like to me. Like he was playing off of our expectations of what traditional theater experience should be.
Yeah, and also a traditional interpretation of Arthur Miller. And, I think a great playwright will write things that can sustain radically different interpretations
like
from
Chekhov,
directors.
like you just talked about Chekhov.
Exactly. So
I felt us veering into, and this was a great fear of mine coming down to talk to you, we were veering into the philosophical because I know you majored as an undergrad in philosophy, and I majored in philosophy as an undergrad as well, but learned absolutely nothing and can recall virtually nothing. What happened to me was my brain was kind of trained to be able to formulate arguments. And I can't pull out a philosopher and quote them for the life of me. I remember sitting in certain classes, like a philosophy of science class, and every class twice a week I would be like, no clue.
But you still continued to major in it.
Oh yeah. And I pretty much finished my major course requirements by the end of my second year. I only had like the very specific requirements that you could only take in your junior and senior year. So it was essentially done early, but literally it was
one thing I remember about being a philosophy major is that you kind of had less reading than like English majors, but the problem is that it was easy to have these short reading assignments in philosophy and be like, I'm done, but you didn't understand a single word of it because it's so abstract.
Right, yeah. You don't have to eat this whole meal, just this one piece. It's just extremely, extremely dense, and you're going to need gallons of water to get it down.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just like, ever since I graduated undergrad, I've kind of been afraid of mentioning my major because people know.
People will quiz you on it.
Oh God, yeah. And some people who didn't major in it but just have an interest in it will be like, oh great, philosophy, let's talk. And I'm like, can we talk about baseball instead? Because I could rattle off some statistics from the Red Sox.
Talk about the philosophy of baseball.
Yeah. You said something a couple minutes ago, and we kind of like blasted right through it. But I'm very curious. You mentioned a very strict father who. This is when we start to get. I turned into the psychiatrist. The very strict father who was not so interested in allowing you to watch television and he went to this really interesting school, and I'll use the word interesting school. And so I'm wondering if your relationship to the arts is because you were the way you were nurtured growing up. Like, were you in a particularly artistic household? And
yeah, it was. I definitely was. I mean, my parents are huge appreciators of the arts and never did anything but encourage me to be artistic, creative, to be a writer. However, their style of parenting was more restrictive, let's say, than a lot of the kids that I went to school with or the school itself would have suggested. So there was a weird clash between the fact that I was going to school at a place that was just sort of constant mayhem, and then coming home to a house where, there were rules and there were bedtimes and there were kind of like tasks that if you did not do them, you got yelled at and things like that. So I don't know, but I guess at the same time, my parents chose to send me to that school, and they have always, I think, appreciated and they both are very independent thinkers as well. And I think that independence of mind and spirit was always hugely encouraged in my house and in my family. Yeah. And, but I also tried to leave the school that I went to the school, and then I decided that I wasn't being challenged enough. And I sent myself basically to boarding school for 1 year, and it was the exact opposite type of environment. I went to an extremely uptight, waspy boarding school in Connecticut.
How old were you?
I was in 10th grade, so I was 16. And, it was basically hell, but I made a really good friend, and then we forced out each other's roommates so that we could be roommates, and then we just lived in this room together and like had bunk beds and shared a bunk bed at night sometimes, and like smoked cigarettes out our window. Ha ha! We never got caught. So
when you are rebellious by nature, and you're in an environment that welcomes rebellion, it doesn't feel like rebellion.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, totally. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. And I can say one good thing about my boarding school year is that it's the only year I was ever taught any science or history, because in my school, we only learned about like the Harlem Renaissance and like why pornography was like maybe positive if the woman was in charge of it. And like I remember when I was in like 8th grade, like the senior girls led this class where they brought us in and they like showed us pornography and then said, never shave your legs. So I never shaved my legs since then, which I've always been grateful about. Anyway, so I had just a weird education. I very much want to at some point write like a memoir about Poughkeepsie Day School, because it was a really strange and interesting place. Yeah. We once had a class about The Simpsons. That was pretty cool.
An entire class about
We
The
just
Simpsons?
got to watch The Simpsons. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. This sounds like the type of classes you can take in these, hippy-dippy colleges like Hampshire College.
They were
very
similar kind of spirit infusing Poughkeepsie Day School as Hampshire. And in fact, people would often go to Hampshire from PDS, but it was a similar type of thing.
I actually say that with fondness, because when I went to college because that's what you're supposed to do after high school. I was not emotionally prepared to go away to college, but all of my friends went, so okay, I go to college. And after a year, I was like, oh, like I need some kind of like looser environment where I can find myself. And I had a friend that went to Hampshire, and I was like, I don't know if I could handle Hampshire, but Goddard College in Vermont might be my jam. And I really looked into going to Goddard, and I started to fill out an application, and then I got so insecure about losing friends and having to meet new friends because I had found my personality as a person. Like I didn't really have much of a personality before college, and I was afraid of losing that and having to redefine myself and who am I, to do that. So anyway, I don't shit on these schools and their loose environments. I actually think they're kind of wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of reflecting on, I feel like there's some theme in everything I'm saying that's about structure versus structurelessness, and there are huge benefits to both, and there's also huge imbalances that can be found on either end, But for sure, my crazy hippie school empowered us to have almost too much personality. Like you've never seen teenagers who are this confident and know and have just these voices, but. Interestingly, I mean, I'm now 36, and one of my best friends who I went to middle school and high school with at Poughkeepsie Day School also lives in LA and is a painter and just got into the Whitney Biennial. And I look at this person's work and I see the exact aesthetic that was being born when we were in high school, and I'm sure they feel the same way about my plays,
Can you see that in yourself?
Definitely, yeah.
How did your upbringing or your experiences at Poughkeepsie? I knew I was going to do that. I was so in my head. Poughkeepsie Day School. How does it manifest in your work?
Well, there was certainly a full-hearted embrace of radicalism and of being a radical and saying the radical thing, speaking truth to power. I mean, that was, and being, I think, like deeply skeptical of authority, and sort of institutions of. I mean, we didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember like. Actually, on September 11th, I was at Haverford, which was a Quaker school, and Quakers are pacifists, nonviolent. I wouldn't have necessarily expected that this would have been the response at Haverford to 9/11, but what happened on the day, it was, September 11th, my senior year of college. I had actually just returned from a long junior year abroad in Europe, and now back in America, and starting a new year of school, and this thing happens. And they called the school together to a Quaker meeting, which is, you sit together and you're silent until somebody is moved to speak, right? So I go to this Quaker meeting along with everybody from Haverford, but there was one person there, a guy named Kevin, who also had gone to Poughkeepsie Day School with me. So when he had gone, and we both went to Haverford, and we were sitting next to each other in this gym. There's a moment of silence. I totally fully expect for the first thing to be said for someone to be like, critical of how we got here and maybe saying some hope or expectation that the immediate response would not be to go to war or to be violent. And instead, the first girl stands up, grabs the microphone, and she's like, I want to say a little Pledge of Allegiance to that flag up there, and points to the basketball hoop where there's like 5 flags, including the American flag. But I was like, what is she talking about? The Swarthmore flag? Like, it was so insane. And then every single person just stood up and gave the Pledge of Allegiance except me and Kevin, who just sat down because we never gave the Pledge of Allegiance. We weren't trained in that way, which doesn't mean that we don't love America, but I think we were raised to love like the Howard Zinn version of America.
Did you have it memorized, the Pledge of Allegiance?
I think only because of camp,
yeah.
Because, but it was just totally surreal. It was like some sort of normative cultural training that we had not received. But, I knew a lot about, like I graduated high school knowing about like Simone de Beauvoir and I don't know. I'm trying to think. Just sort of the things that were emphasized as I mean we would have a Thanksgiving tradition, a Thanksgiving school collective celebration together, and it would certainly involve like reflecting on the Native Americans, like I mean it was just very anti-establishment, my education, and I guess basically communist in some way. But yeah.
Yeah, I think I like to go, like, I think about this in terms of my own, like we all frame everything in our own experiences. So I go back to my own experience and figure out how I came to be where I am. And I wasn't pushed in any particular direction ever. So I just was directionless for so long, which is why I didn't become a writer until I was basically in my early 30s. I found everything on my own. It seems like you were not aggressive. Maybe is aggression aggressively pushed in a certain direction. But I've never met anybody with your experience because you seem to have been pushed in an aggressive direction that is very unstructured. So it's like this structured lack of structure that I'm trying to reconcile in my head.
I was weirdly like, it's a funny thing because I do feel like in my life I have put a lot of pressure on myself / had pressure put on me to become to work very, very hard at doing something that would be potentially disruptive. Rather than, I was never pressured to like make money. And I say that fully conscious of like a position of privilege. I mean, I grew up with money. My parents paid for me to go to these private schools, but money was never the object, the object was something else. It was about like, having a worldview, having and making a difference. Maybe because of the awareness of privilege, like it has always seemed to me like issues of social justice have always like weighed very heavily on me, and maybe a little too heavily, because I think there can also be an extreme sort of narcissism or egocentricity to thinking that like it's on you to fix the world. That's obviously more than any person can be asked. But I have always.
Well, it's also privilege to think that.
It is, hugely. Yeah. Yes, totally. But I have also had privilege. And so it's like, how am I going to use that privilege? But I think that there's also just in the entire culture I was raised in, and I grew up in the Hudson Valley. I haven't even mentioned that that's where this school was, and that's where my parents live. And I think, there's a lot of appreciation for the arts in that area, and also appreciation for the landscape, and wanting to fight to protect both of those things, those human traditions. I mean, one of the most famous like Hudson Valley artists is Pete Seeger, who went around singing songs about environmentalism and social justice, and he was revered at my school. And so, I think, I don't know, those are the traditions I grew up in. It was it is a kind of bohemian hippie. We lived near Woodstock. I don't know.
Was there ever a motivation or a consideration to go into another field? I always wanted to be a writer, but there were times when I also thought about trying to study society from like an academic perspective. So I thought about like wanting to be a sociologist or wanting to study semiotics. I think I've always been interested in kind of like decoding the way that society works, and especially in relationship to power dynamics, and how we can shift and upend the established power dynamics of the day. It was always gonna, but I think, I found my way. I always loved writing and communicating. And once I discovered playwriting, that became my favorite way of doing it. And I think part of the reason why is because in a play, you are showing more than one perspective at once, and you're not revealing to the audience which perspective you yourself personally are aligned with. So you are able to consider multiple points of view, which in and of itself is a sort of decentering of authoritarian power. So I can segue easily from here to talking about the television show that I've been writing for the past 2 years, which is The Affair, which is created by Sarah Treem, who is a playwright who I went to Yale with and have known for over 10 years. And I think the very brilliant thing that Sarah does in The Affair is that she shows events from multiple perspectives, and she never reveals the quote unquote objective truth, because in a sense there is no objective truth. I mean, I'm not going to say there's no objective truth, period, in every situation. I think sometimes there is an objective truth. But on The Affair, there is no objective truth. And what she's able to say is, like, in relationships, that
that line between truth and fiction is extremely blurry. What I experience might not match up with what you experience, and yet both of our experiences are valid and have to be dealt with and confronted in some way. And I think that The Affair is a feminist show precisely because it does not allow for there to be one authorial, capital T version of the truth. And I think that's very upsetting to people. And it's one of the reasons why people both get addicted to the show but also get very upset by it, because it's disturbing to us to think that our sense of reality could be called into question.
It's funny because I haven't watched the show yet, but the concept of an affair, people are extremely black and white about, even more so than other, relationship crimes, where there's a lot of gray area and debate. But I feel like most of the people that I have known in my life have been, you have an affair, it's like, that's the deal breaker. You can start doing coke and we can talk about that and send you to rehab, but an affair, no. It's over. And so I actually had that thought when the show came out a couple of years ago. I was just like, how the hell are they going to do a show about an affair? Everyone is just like going to hate the person that cheated on the other person, and then they're going to be the villain, and
totally,
and that's it.
Totally. And I think that exploring the morality of affairs is one of the things that the show is doing, but really the deeper experiment that the show is up to has to do with this splitting and doubling of perspective and this sort of Rashomon experience of television, which nobody ever did before Sarah did it, and it's really incredible. And The Affair was sort of the way into that, or the excuse to have that experiment, which is also not to say that all the issues about love and faithfulness or, duplicity, I think I'm just sort of avoiding getting into it because I have spent 2 years talking about it nonstop. And I kind of feel like at the end of the day, I don't know, if you have an affair, you're opening up a can of worms, but maybe you could put it back together again. I'm not sure.
Has it changed your perspective on it? Did you have a strong point of view coming into this show, working on the show?
I didn't. It was just funny because I literally got married right before I started working on The Affair, and I was on my honeymoon when I found out that I got the job, and I got back from my honeymoon and then started the show, and then spent 2 years talking about infidelity. And I would go home to my husband every night and be like, let's never cheat on each other, because it just seems like a real hassle. At the end of the day, I think it's just a real hassle. So, I don't know.
So the show seems to feed your creative urge to work in an environment where the rules
I forgot
aren't
to say
traditional.
Definitely. I think that's right. And I meant to say that, the special thing about The Affair working environment is that it's basically all playwrights. So it's me, Sarah Treem, David Henry Wong, Shar White, and a few other writers who are more traditionally television writers, but are very open to spending their time with a bunch of crazy playwrights. And but we speak a language of theater as well as a language of television, and it's really wonderful to be able to go back and forth between those two sort of vocabularies or toolkits in a way.
I talk to so many playwrights who work in television, and the tendency is to have a writer's room and there's a playwright in it.
Right, like the token.
Yeah, or there's maybe a comic book writer and a playwright and maybe a novelist and then TV writers.
Right.
So this room is
heavily playwright.
A little bit like an anomaly.
Yeah.
Can you identify how a playwright would attack a problem on a TV show versus how a TV writer would attack a problem? Or kind of like, can you differentiate between the two types of writers?
I mean, I think there's sort of tendencies. I don't know. The first thing that pops into my mind just has to do with the way that playwrights tend to use time and space. And this is it's not necessarily for better or for worse on either end, but I think that television writers have this instinctive sense of wanting to keep it moving, 2-page scenes, short dialogue and you're out, and a playwright will happily write an entire episode that takes place in one room and they're having long conversations and it's going on and on and on and getting into, but or another version of that we have done on The Affair a few times is sort of going back over the same ground from a new angle, so like the episode takes place in 2 hours, but we see those 2 hours from 4 different angles or something like that, or we kind of even this season we have a scene that takes place in one episode and then we go back to that same scene in the next episode and see it from another person's perspective. So that is a playwrighty instinct to want to sort of like fully explore and mine all that there is in this one interaction, this one pivotal day or this one pivotal conversation. I think that the trick is figuring out, when you do a play, the words are all there is. The words are everything. The words paint the pictures. The audience is there to listen, and the actors have to deliver the lines so that the audience is able to see all the images that are spun through those lines. In television, images rule the day over words. And I feel, even just as a television viewer, like when someone talks for too long, I just space out, because I'm just staring at a screen. I'm not listening to a person, So it's a tricky challenge. And that's why I say it's not necessarily better for TV writing to have the playwriting instinct. But I suppose why would it be better? What is something that playwrights do better? I think maybe playwrights, because when we are playwrights, we are responsible for the whole entire story ourselves. And it's a real act of courage and kind of insanity to write a play, because why would you bother writing a play? Who's ever going to do it? Who's ever going to see it? But, well, it must be because you really fucking have something to say, And I think that's, to me, I don't necessarily know that every television writer is coming to the table every day because there's something they've got to say. But I think most playwrights have that, and there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of like philosophical passion, political passion. People are passionate about storytelling, about the representation of human beings, and seeing why it matters to a society that we create challenging representations of human beings. So I think the standards are a little higher in terms of what the work is meant to bring across.
But does a playwright in a TV room potentially have a blind spot that perhaps a TV writer doesn't have?
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I would say number one being having to do with the actual execution of the production of a television show, which is a massive undertaking that costs millions of dollars and employs hundreds of people. And at the end of the day, like, you need to have your shit ready to go and be able to like have, these 100 people understand what the hell the scene is and just put it on and do it, and have there be a clear sense of action, because otherwise no one knows what they're doing there when they're standing on set at 5 a.m. and they're freezing and they're trying to carry out this weird thing that you wrote. There's not a lot of room for trial and error once you get on set. So you have to be kind of results oriented in a way, whereas I think in playwriting you can be a lot more process oriented, because you could be changing the play even up to the day before opening night. You have
in a way
plenty
that
of time.
you can't in a TV even if you're the writer of that episode.
Right. But I also think that TV in general right now, it's very exciting because TV is moving, I think, pretty clearly in a direction where a lot more shows are going to be made in a model that's more similar to how like an independent film would have been made in the 90s. So in other words, you sell a show, you write 10 episodes, all the episodes are locked before you ever even get on set. Then you have the, 10 weeks of shooting, and you cross-board the whole thing and you shoot it like a movie. And for me, that would be the ideal, because that way you can see the whole story at once and you can really know what you're trying to say. And I think that is more like how plays happen too, right? Because plays have beginning, middles, and ends. I mean, for me, the biggest problem with television writing as a form is this sort of lack of an ending. It's like if you always have to keep it open and keep going and keep going and keep going, like at a certain point you are just babbling.
Sure, and there's this urge to want to change your characters.
Right,
Like,
because you run out of things for them to do.
You want your character to change.
Right.
You know, we have these flawed characters and you want them to go on this journey, right?
Right. Well, that's true, right. Or I just
And
thought
TV kind of keeps you from being able to do that.
Or they go on a journey that's so long and so twisty and so crazy that it loses all sense in the end because it's like, it's like he oh God, he's a robot. Okay. Fine. I don't know.
I have we're getting close to the end and we have to pivot to your play. And I didn't find like a natural pivot point where we can pivot into it. But I wanted to make sure that we got into it before we had to part. So let me invent something.
Okay.
While you're writing on the show, are you on show right now? Are you in production right now?
No, we finished about a month ago. Yeah.
So you've been able to work on Icebergs.
Yes, I have.
At the Geffen
I was in
Playhouse.
rehearsal and yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. So tell me about it.
Okay. So Icebergs is my most recent play. It is, I think, my 8th play that I've written, and sort of my 6th play, I'd say, that's been in a certain specific mode, which this play is in, which is that I've written this group of plays where there are about 4 or 5 characters. They're all the same age. They're all the age that I was while I was writing the play. So in this case, like 35, because I wrote the play last year. And they're a group of peers who are coming from sort of different perspectives, have different jobs, are from different walks of life, but find themselves grappling with a similar set of issues. So in this instance, with this play, it's sort of about the anxiety of wanting to put down roots and build a family and balance career and family life and sort of figure out what matters to you and where you're going to put your energy, all against the backdrop of a very scary world where many things feel like they are on the brink of collapse, largely because of global warming and, now
Everything. Now everything, literally.
But Icebergs is set in a very pleasant little bungalow in Silver Lake, and my like the first line of the stage directions in the script say Los Angeles, where the weather is always nice out, or where it's always nice out. So the idea being that like they're sort of in this pristine little utopia, and everything looks great, but under the surface there's a lot of anxiety that's being dealt with, and I think there's like I said, I've kind of like developed this style where I write these plays where they happen more or less in real time. It's like one afternoon into an evening with this group of friends / frenemies maybe, and they're kind of grappling with some big issue, but in a way that makes it is sort of interpolated into their personal lives and their relationships with each other. So the play I wrote before this was about Occupy Wall Street and sort of the idea of being a radical and whether there's a way in today's world to actually be radical, or whether it's always a sort of just like social posture for likes and follows in a way. And then the play before that I wrote about like the housing crisis and the 2008 stock crash, but it was all about this group of old friends kind of reckoning with, one of them had made a movie about one, and they were dealing with like the ethics of that, so it but again, in all of them it's like a group of people who are the same age and who have real intimacy with each other, but are arguing across worlds a little bit. So in this play, there's a filmmaker and his wife who's an actress, but they have a friend come to visit who's a scientist, and he's kind of giving them the perspective from geologic time, the perspective from 30,000 feet about how, the Arctic used to be hot and there used to be crocodiles in it. Of course, that's before there were people, but but Yeah, so they're kind of, it's often about people negotiating a very personal problem, like accidentally in front of other people. And I want to give people in the audience the sense that they have sort of just dropped in and are voyeuristically getting to watch a real evening happen between people that feel as real as possible. So I guess I've come full circle to saying that there is such a thing as real. But I don't know. This is my version of realism. Who knows?
Right, but perhaps in 50 years this play is done with masks.
I would
Right.
totally love that and support it. I'll put a note in the script.
Are you in these situations? Are you an active participant in these debates? Do you sit back and
In which
watch,
debates?
Like let's say there's a gathering of people at your bungalow in Silver Lake. Are you in the midst of this conversation, or are you the one quietly sitting on the side and
I'm
sipping your
rarely the
glass
one
of
that's
wine?
quietly sitting on the side, I have to admit. I would say I have like very passionate conversations with very close friends, many of which I've been friends with for a really long time. I mean, some going all the way back to high school, some college, I'm really lucky because I have some very good friends from different parts of my life who have ended up living in Los Angeles all at the same time. So I feel like I have this sort of support system through my friends, which is another thing that Icebergs is about very much. It's about the way that in lieu of other structures of society being there to hold us, our friends can hold us and our friends can take care of us. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this play grew completely organically out of real conversations that I have on a daily basis with everyone in my life, my husband, my friends.
Are you ever able to find yourself amongst people who disagree with you politically? That's sort of...
There's a thing called Twitter, and
Right.
that's where anyone can go to find someone who disagrees with them.
I've heard of it.
And, honestly,
That's the bubble breaker.
I have to
right?
say that, I have to say, too, though, that this election, one of the really traumatic things about it has been realizing that I have pretty strong political disagreements with people that I'm quite close to. The political spectrum does not just go from red to blue anymore. You don't have to know a lot of people that voted for Trump to know people that you can get in huge fights with about the direction of this country and what caused the state that we are in now. I think that's been pretty fascinating and a little scary for me, honestly, because I'm actually not really used to disagreeing with a lot of people that I engage with. And lately I feel like I have been. So
Something I talked about before was how my relationship to the internet changed on 9/11 because I'm a couple years older than you. So I was in, one of my first jobs postgraduate, and I was living in Boston. And, the internet wasn't the same then as it is now, but it still existed, and the access was still, always there. But I didn't use it very often. I checked in a couple times a day, perhaps in the morning and near the end of the day. And then I worked all day long. And then 9/11 happened, and I just started to refresh, check this page, this page, that, always. And here we are 15 years later. And that, it just, like, I became so, like, it was so important to me. And this election actually set me off that. I can't do that anymore. And it started on November 9th.
yeah.
I was like, I am no longer going through my series of websites
Yep.
every hour.
Well, yeah, my husband has had a very similar reaction. Basically, since the election, he has said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to listen to podcasts. I don't want to read blogs. I don't want to read the news, because in a way, he felt like all we did was read the news and talk about it for 2 straight years leading up to this election. And it seems like nobody knew what they were talking about the whole time. So why would anybody know what they were talking about now? And also, like, I mean, this is like the massive, almost like psychiatric challenge for our age is like, how much are we going to engage? Because you can always hit refresh and you can always get new, shocking news.
But is that engagement?
Right. Like, what is that? Is
Yeah.
that civic responsibility to be literally like on the edge of or even over the edge of complete paranoid meltdown at all times of the day. I don't know that that's helpful for anybody. It's weird. I think that we're this is going to be a conversation that we're all going to have, because we were raised to think that like the responsible person knows what's going on in the world. But like, how much can you know?
Yeah, there's staying informed, and then there's addiction.
Yes.
Basically. And
Yes.
I'm trying to
Yes.
wean myself from an addiction
Yeah.
and finding new ways to be informed. And then there's a difference between being informed and engaging.
Yes.
And how do we engage now?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also that like maybe, I mean, some form, like being a writer, being any kind of creative writer or even an essay writer or whatever, like part of what that means is that you take time to absorb, digest, reflect. You don't just react, you know? So like, I think that, you know, you have to like really work hard to carve out the time in which you can kind of process all of this in a way that's maybe a little more constructive than just like a Facebook post or a tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to do that?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to stay off Twitter, but we'll see.
I'm going to try to do that too.
Yeah. That's great.
And I think that's a good spot to end on.
Cool.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so
I appreciate
much.
it.
Of course, it was so fun.
Thank you, Alena Smith, for coming into the studio today. Her play Icebergs is running at the Geffen Playhouse in Los Angeles until December 18th. Go to geffenplayhouse.org for tickets and information. While you're on the internet, go to Twitter and follow us at Subtext Podcast. Go to your email and send us a message, thesubtextpodcast@gmail.com. Then go to iTunes and subscribe. After that, you can do whatever else you like to do on the internet. On to the thank yous. Thank you, Danny Oliver, LA Stage Alliance, and At This Stage magazine for producing this show. Thank you to David at JTB Recording Studio in Los Angeles. Thank you to the band International Pen Pal for our theme song. And thank you for listening. Next month, I'll share my favorite breathing exercises to combat anxiety. You're going to need it to get through the next 4 years.